Hello, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday with 3W. Wellness Wednesday is sponsored by 3W Medical for Women, a nonprofit medical clinic offering free of charge or low-cost women's health services in the Seattle area, regardless of income or insurance status. 3W does not profit off of the health choices women make. The information shared in this podcast is the opinion of the speaker or speakers. Medical information is not intended as individual medical consultation, but for general education only. Always talk to or consult your own health professional for personalized advice regarding medical decisions. And if you're in the Seattle area, consider making an appointment to consult with us. I'm Helen Nguyen, CEO of WAMS/3W Medical for Women, and the host of today's podcast. Hey there, Wellness Wednesday listeners. Thank you for joining us today. I'm back in the studio with another guest speaker, with another expert in her field. We have Tori Murphy here with us today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And we are so continuously so lucky to have these amazing people that come into our organization, partner with our organization, and come with this depth of information and depth of knowledge. And today we're going to be scratching the surface of domestic violence, or DV. And it is like Tori and I kind of mentioned when off mic, we were kind of saying, this is not a fun topic to talk about. But it is a topic that is very prevalent in our community. It's very, very taboo still. And it impacts a lot more people than we think. You know, I kind of come into these podcasts trying to do not a lot of research, because I really want the expert, someone like Tori, to come and, you know, really fill our cup up with education and information. But I kind of did a little bit of a quick Google search, and the numbers are still so high and so prevalent. I didn't mention this to you, Tori, but when I was in high school, I was a part of this like teen girls group that went out and did presentations about domestic violence in high schools around Seattle.
I feel like, since that's where your first like important relationship starts, that's totally a great place to start.
Yes. So I'm familiar just thinking about this topic as we were coming into the studio. I'm somewhat familiar with it. I've been pretty disconnected from it, I want to say, the last 10 plus years. But I used to be a teen peer advocate is what we were called. And we would go into high schools and talk about what healthy relationships look like.
That's awesome.
And what like power and control looks like in a relationship. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and it has impacted people in my life. And I'm sure yours as well. And so I'm so grateful that you're willing and available to come and speak about this really hard topic, domestic violence.
Yeah.
So Tori, just to give our listeners a little bit of a background about who you are, can you talk a little bit more about yourself? First of all, Tori's kind of a badass, guys. So just to let you guys know, she can kick your ass. But yeah, just can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now, and why you're passionate about this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, I think I'll start from the beginning instead of saying what I'm doing right now.
Sure.
I joined the Army when I was 18. I knew I always wanted to work in law enforcement because I always wanted to have a really positive impact on my community. And I think even that is a very taboo topic, right? Yeah. Does law enforcement have a positive impact on the community? If so, what does that kind of look like? Yeah. And so I have always felt like a calling to help my community wherever I can. Specifically, I'm a very protective person. And I think that's because I'm an oldest sibling. So I have two youngest sisters. So definitely very protective of them. And I think it's just weaved itself into this huge part of my personality. And so I joined the Army as a military police officer, which was big. That's a very big change, right?
Yes.
I didn't know what it was going to look. I had my ideas, my thoughts of what it's going to be like. but didn't actually realize like what the Army was until I got into it. And that's a whole other
can of worms, right?
rabbit hole. Being a woman in the military.
Yes.
But
good
then
topic.
Yeah, totally. And then I was selected for the investigations section. So in the Army, there's military police investigations, and then there's the CID, Criminal Investigative Division. And military police investigations really does like the misdemeanor assaults, like really the more petty crimes, I would say. And then like serious sexual assaults and things like that get passed on to CID, murders, things like that. The thing is, so I was stationed at JBLM here in Washington. And the thing is that unfortunately domestic violence is so prevalent in the military community especially, but that JBLM being one of the biggest military installations, obviously this is like very severely affecting them on JBLM. I don't know what their numbers look like now, right? This was a long time ago. But CID could no longer keep up with like domestic violence cases. So these became this more of like a simple assault, and it became a military police investigations function. Wow. And that was, I would say, out of all of my cases, like probably 90% of what I dealt with when I was in the MPI section. Yeah. So that consisted of like responding in real time, especially like overnight, because obviously at nighttime, that's when the family's all back in the home. Responding overnight and helping couples to separate and figure out what happened, right? Was it verbal or was it physical? And then helping them find a way to move forward, hopefully providing them with some resources if no crime was committed. But yeah, definitely a huge learning experience for me. Right about the same time that I was selected for military police investigations, I was married, so very young. And I'm obviously not married to that person anymore. It was a very toxic relationship. A lot of things happened, and I'm sure that we'll dig into that a little bit more today. But helping people, like responding to incidents of domestic violence and helping people actually helped me heal from that relationship. Being able to like, I think maybe understand domestic violence from a less personal point of view, right? Like this isn't about me. This is actually like a societal issue that needs to be addressed. Help me really like recover and work through that. I was really interested in psychology, right? Because I'm like, how does this relate? How do people get to this point? What is going on? Like, why is it like this? And so when I got out, I got my degree in criminal justice and in psychology, still with hopes of them working together. And right now I work for Veteran Security Operations, which is, a local veteran-owned and operated security company, very great.
Yes, we love.
Yeah.
We love them.
It's been, again, on the female in the military topic, it's been really nice to return to a place just working with other veterans. Like the camaraderie there is very different than I think any other workplace. I have had a few other jobs since being out of the military, and it's just not the same. Just the bond that you already have without even having to really try. Like you don't have to really create the trust. The trust is already there. I know this person has my back, and being able to work with people side by side every day. There's not really any times when I'm like dreading going to work. You know what I mean? I'm happy. I want to go and like hang out and see my friends. And while I'm doing that, I do my job and we all do it together. And so it's been really nice. It's been really rewarding, but I've had a lot of opportunities now. And this is how you and I got connected to join these things together, right? A couple weeks ago, I spoke at a women's veterans event, and I did talk about domestic violence and women in the military. And so I've had a lot more, because of this job, a lot more opportunities to connect with female veterans and other women, especially on the topic of domestic violence. And I just feel like, right, it can't be a coincidence, right? Where I am in my life, like it's so easy right now to be able to make these connections, to start talking about this more. And I think that that's so important. I think like when things start coming to you easily, you're on the right path. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And like just hearing you talk about it, it's something that you're obviously very passionate about. It's something that you're very well versed in speaking about, as our listeners are going to get to hear. And it's not a coincidence, because it's like it's become your thing, and that's the soapbox that you get to share with the world. Like, this is my thing, and I get to be an expert in it. And it sounds like you've even had personal experience in it, and that's a good thing when we find our niche. It's a really it's rewarding in a level that's not transactional. Yeah. That's
it's
really
very,
good.
Very intrinsic, for sure. Being able to just like share the experiences with other women and then listen to their experiences as well. And being able to share like little tidbits on things that I've learned that people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. You know what I mean? And vice versa. Same thing happens to me. So I think right now in this, I just turned 30. So in this period of my life, I feel like I'm so interested in learning new things, learning literally about anything. Like, and every day, if there's a learning opportunity, I think that this is like the best day ever.
Aww.
You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
That's so good. Yes. And I think, as you hone in, I think there's something about, for women, this is a tangent, folks. When we turn 30,
Totally,
it is like a different vibe. Like we just like elevate ourselves to another level. And I think we become more sure of ourselves to then be able to be like, because I'm confident and sure of myself, I'm able to give a different level of myself to people.
Yeah.
And I think it's a natural maternal female thing to want to take care of people and to want to give back to people, and like it's just a natural thing. And then to do it in a more confident level, just it benefits us. It benefits so many people in our lives.
Totally.
And it's good.
Yeah, for me it was like I feel like, I mean, I'd been thinking about like, oh God, I'm gonna turn 30, right? And there's like this weird like, I don't know, like, am I ready? Like, I had a total like, is this a midlife crisis? I'm just turning 30. Chill.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yes, totally know what you mean.
But it's like I woke up one morning and I was like, I don't really care what anybody thinks about me anymore.
Yeah.
And like that's been 90% of what holds me back in life. So
isn't that so rewarding?
Yeah.
Oh, just wait until you're almost. I'm
I love
36.
it. I can't wait.
I'm getting to my 40s, and I'm like, you know what? In the prime of my Karen phase is what I'm calling it.
Yep.
And I don't give like two shits about anything.
Let's do this.
Yes.
Let's go full throttle.
Yes. And I think we're also at a maturity level in a sense of like, if we're wrong, we're willing to say sorry about it.
My
and
gosh.
We're willing to admit
Yeah.
it. And as lifelong learners, it's like, okay, sorry, I effed up and I stepped into that and I didn't mean to. And it's much easier to apologize in some ways. And I don't think I would have been as readily and willing in my 20s to admit that I was wrong.
Totally. It's the stubbornness.
Yeah, but there's something about like in your 30s that you're just there.
I love it. Yeah. There's been so much growth already. And I'm like, I was dreading this so much. Now I'm having like the time of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a weird, trust me, I drank a lot of Fireball when I turned 30.
Totally.
Yeah, it was a really fun time. Anyways, but just I'm so grateful that this is your niche. Like this is your thing to talk about and to continue to talk about, because domestic violence is not going to go away in a day. It's like you said, it's a societal issue, and what does that mean to you? Can you define what that means to you? What does societal issue mean?
I think for me, when I say societal issue, I think that it means like there is, first of all, that we have a responsibility as a society to talk about and like to address this in a real way. And to, I mean, psychology, in the study of science, you want to find out what is causing something. I don't even think that anyone has really had a very honest, like serious conversation about what are the things that are causing this. Like, let's look at it on like, let's build some graphs. You know what I mean? Yeah. Let's do some serious studies, get down to the bottom of it. Right. And then, because we're doing the same thing, right? For like, I think for kids eating issues or like foods that are that are not healthy that we're feeding our kids. There have been so many studies done on this. And then it's like, you know, public schools have, let's put it into, we're creating food groups and things like that. And I think that this needs to be, how to navigate relationships should be something that starts at such a young age. And that's why I love, you know, you talking about what you did in high school. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because that's when, like, I mean, a lot of a lot of people's first like sexual experience or
Yes.
like very serious relationship, your
Yes.
first one is in high school.
High school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't know what that's supposed to look like, right? Hopefully you
Yeah.
have a good relationship. Your parents had a good relationship that you could emulate. But if they didn't, like I have found that most people are just doing exactly what their parents did, which why wouldn't they? You know what I mean? That's where you learn all of your behaviors.
Right.
Yeah, the nature nurture.
Yeah,
thing.
and in your opinion, don't you think these intense sexual, if not intimate, deep relationships are starting younger?
Yeah, no, I definitely
Like,
do.
I'm seeing like middle school kids, right? Like get into these like really deep relationships, and I don't know if it's because it's being influenced by social media. I don't know if it's being influenced by this lack of community. Because
Probably a fair.
just a little bit of
Yeah.
everything, maybe. I mean, Washington State. I just came back from the South, and people in their South, they're just so nice, guys. Like they're so personable and so nice, and there is this automatically this sense of community. And I think out here in Washington State, we lack that very much so. There's this isolation that we've kind of all been comfortable with, and yeah, I
think it's funny, like the closer that you live to like a big city and it's like everyone's living on top of each other, right? But then nobody really talks. There's none of that like neighborhood.
Yes.
The like close sense of like who my neighbor is.
Yeah.
Do we watch each other's backs kind of thing? Do they watch my house when they know I'm out of town? Do I tell them I'm out of town because I don't trust them? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that that's so funny because like in the South, right, a lot of people do have a lot more distance between them and their neighbor. Like my husband's from Texas. He took me to go and visit and I'm like, this is great. I love this. You know what I mean? And he's like, let's go visit so-and-so. Like they're my neighbor from when I grew up and they have horses and let's go see. And I'm like, okay. And it's like a 15-minute drive, but they call them the neighbor. Like that's my closest neighbor is a 15-minute drive away. And I'm like, that's really cool.
Yes.
Yeah. And he hasn't been there for, it had probably been like 6 to 8 years. And the guy immediately recognized him. Oh my gosh, welcome back.
Isn't that fun?
So yeah, the vibe is very, very different. Yeah. It definitely is very different than here. I think it's like a coast to coast thing, but I found that on the West Coast for sure. That I'm like, I barely know my neighbors, and I live in a very nice neighborhood. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a weird thing. It's a weird cultural shift out here. I try very hard not to fall into that kind of mentality, but how does that, in your opinion, heighten issues such as DV when you're in a lack of a community kind of setting?
Yeah.
Do you think it contributes at all?
I do. I definitely do. Well, so I think from Hollywood, right, everybody has this idea of what domestic violence is. And I think that this is really important to speak on this. It's always, right, like this, he persuaded her to, swept her off her feet. They had this beautiful wedding. It's always like the money dynamic, right? Like he's the savior and he comes in and he's like a white knight. And then a year later, she's got like these insane bruises and she's hiding it from her family and she's trying to get away and he's stalking her. And it's like, I'm not saying that those experiences don't happen.
Sure.
However, my belief is that 90% of domestic violence is truly just relationships and where people don't know how to communicate properly in order to address their issues in a healthy way. And that it escalates to physical violence maybe on one person or even both. And that's what I saw a lot when I was working domestic violence cases. It was both. You know, it wasn't like we think domestic violence and it's one person targeting the other and these unhealthy behaviors and they're like torturing this person. Again, not saying that doesn't happen, but in my experience, the majority of, and I'll say quote unquote, domestic violence cases are just two people who have a hard time trying to navigate like regular relationship issues in a healthy way. And when we disagree, it escalates to a physical point, whether that's because you don't know how to manage your emotions or because that was a learned behavior from your childhood. I think there are so many factors.
So what you're trying to say is like it starts with just not even the physical part, but it can escalate to the physical part.
Absolutely, yeah.
And do you think that's like the pivotal kind of point of domestic violence? Because it starts smaller, right? It starts like maybe just back and forth miscommunication or like gaslighting or all of that stuff, like manipulation and all of that stuff. And then it escalates to the point where someone from the outside sees that you have a black eye.
Yep.
That's the pivotal point.
Yeah. I mean, and now that I did it so many times, I started to like me working law enforcement, right? It's like, this is my job to understand this thing from a certain perspective and to try to address it or help these people address it. And I don't think that there's really any formula, but what I noticed was that there were always houses where it was that it's like, yep, that house called again. You know what I mean? It's a very like repeat callers. There's always something happening. The neighbors are always complaining about them fighting. So they're always on your radar, I think, before it becomes physical. From what I noticed is I'm like, okay, we go out there all the time, and what we called it was a verbal domestic. I go out there all the time and I kind of try to help them. Like, I'm, not a therapist, but I try to help them like understand they have an unbiased party sitting in front of them.
Yes.
We're all in the same room, and I can try to help them communicate with each other. And I can be there to ensure that it doesn't escalate. Yeah. And then I can offer them resources like,
therapy.
And I can say, this is of course my interest in like psychology. Now, after studying that as well, I can say there are so many factors, right? Like PTSD, upbringing. Do we have alcoholism in the home? Like there are just so many
Children.
different, just all these stressors.
Yes.
And then, so it would start off verbal. I would try to help as much as I could. Either people would take my advice and things would start to get better. And I did try to follow up with people as much as I could to say, like, how are things going? Are you still together? Is there anything that I can do to help? Any more resources that you're looking for? Something that you were hoping to find out, but you didn't. You know what I mean? And then, of course, you have to let that go because they're adults and they need to be able to do their own thing. And their relationship being successful is up to them.
Right.
And then after that, I noticed if they didn't put in the work or use the resources that I gave them, then we would be called out there again. And then I would start to notice, right, like holes in the drywall, holes in the doors, phones being broken or thrown, like PlayStations being broken was a huge thing. I don't know why. Right? And like you can think into that where you're like, okay, I see what might be kind of going on here. And then from there, of course, there's only so much you can do. When it's only verbal, you can only give people the tools or try to persuade them to take advantage of the tools that are at their disposal. And if they don't, then we're out there again, And unfortunately, that was, it's always like that is the time when it became violent, either for one or both people. In those situations, what I found is like both parties are to blame because like having a physical combat with somebody it takes two people, to do that. I think, and this is what I think trying to say is when people think of quote unquote domestic violence, they think of like one person, typically the male, is the aggressor. He targets and tortures this poor woman, is a lot of people's perception of it. And I have really tried to like get people to think about it as, like I say, a more societal issue. It is both people in a relationship having an unhealthy conversation, whatever it is, not communicating properly, and it's resulting in
now something physical.
Yeah, now something physical happening, it escalating to a point where now we can't go back. And then from there, I mean, in the cycle of domestic violence, it's very complicated.
Yes.
And that physical altercation, a lot of the times it was either that's what one party needed to be able to say, okay, this isn't good, I need to end this relationship. Or that was like the release of stress that they needed to be able to start over. But then the whole process starts over. You know what I'm saying? Like just like the cycle of abuse, it reaches that point where
it explodes.
And then it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again.
Yeah.
Like the love bombing, buying you flowers, everything seems fine for a little while, and then little things here and there start to escalate, and then you have that big blow up, and then it starts over and over and over.
Right. Is from what I remember statistically, it takes someone 7 times, the kind of average number, to leave their abuser because there's a variety of factors that keep them there. Children, financial,
we have
isolation,
bills together, we have kids together.
There's history there that it makes it very hard for someone to leave that type of kind of power and control kind of dynamic.
Well, you love them, and you want the relationship to, nobody wants their relationship to fail. So I think that's a huge part of the excuse, is like it gets turned into like, is this about me, or but I mean, and I can speak on the other perspective as well, and so I would say, like the big, what we think of as the Hollywood, right, domestic violence cases, I also got to see some of those. And just, it made me think of you talking about control, specifically like financial control is a huge problem in military families. And so the very severe like domestic violence cases that I think we should definitely talk about a little bit further are in the military. What I saw, one person is making the money, right? One person goes to work, and then the other person is typically the woman is expected to stay home,
homemaker.
Make sure that the kids, everything is, going well, on base housing, things like that, and that they're not allowed to like spend the money. And then of course, right, if you're going to, these things are like built into the Army almost. Like if you're going to a different duty station and you bring your wife and your kids along, she's already isolated from her family. So every time you move, it's a new isolation from your family or from the friends that you made on base. And that was always those two things, the financial control, and then the isolation, were both like huge factors that I noticed in relationships where domestic violence had been happening for a very long time. And because we could see, all of the installations are connected. So if I looked someone up in our database, I could see if they had other domestic violence law enforcement response at a different duty station.
Okay.
And so these ones that were, so I try to, what I'm saying is like, I'd group them into two categories, domestic violence, right? Like we have unhealthy relationships, people solving their problems. It escalates, gets to a point where it becomes physical, and they both need to do work on themselves to make sure that their relationship is successful. Typically, those don't last very long. Like those are very short relationships, very young relationships. The ones that were in the other category, I would say, which are more concerning, are like, these are people that have been together for 15, 20 years. The wife doesn't know anything different than how her husband has been treating her for such a long time. And I think that's where that, like what we talk about, where that 7 times to leave comes in. Where are you going to go? Who's going to pay your bills? You haven't been working for the last 15 years because you've been raising your kids. So what are you going to put on your resume? You haven't been talking with your family very much. So are they going to take you in? There are so many factors. Why would I leave? Is it really that bad?
Yes. Is it really that bad? Yeah. And you start to minimize the glaring red flags that someone from the outside are like, that's not healthy. That's not good. So, that's wild. I mean, like, there's the reality of domestic violence within normal communities. And then there's the military. That's a whole nother can of worms.
Yes,
like
it
that's a
definitely
whole new, because it's its own world that your typical lay person would not understand.
Well, violence is built into, it's your job. Your job is they train you to be violent, to kill people, to solve, to resolve a conflict by
eliminating someone.
Eliminating. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's hard for a lot of people to separate, like, when I go home.
I can't do that to my wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or vice versa.
Yeah, definitely.
So is there ever a dynamic within the military that the woman is the one that's in the military and the man is not in the military?
Yeah, I saw that. Obviously not as common because there aren't as many women in the military. But yeah, it definitely exists. Yeah.
Okay. And would you say there's still domestic violence within those types of unique situations as well?
Absolutely. I don't think anyone is immune from like this financial control, right? If the husband is staying at home with the kids, you know, the wife, she's the one who goes to work and she makes the money and she still has control of the finances. Everything is connected to like her social security number, you know?
Sure.
I don't think anyone is immune to that, like, oh, I have full control of my relationship. I'm the puppet master kind of thing, which has been, right, an interesting dynamic, I think, just in the world, but like in America, women getting jobs and like how have we been navigating how things used to be and how they are now. And now we're, you know, now pretty much living in the world requires double income to be able to even support your family at all. Whereas before it used to be very different. And I think that dynamic, I don't think anyone is immune to like being in control. It's a very big responsibility to have full control of your relationship. And I would say like the number one thing, at least from what I've learned now being in a healthy marriage, is trust. Like I think a lot of people say that they trust each other, but really they don't. And it takes very difficult conversations to get to a point of where you really, really do have that full trust of somebody else. You know, like when we do put our bank accounts together, do I trust that we're not going to get divorced and you're not going to take everything? You know, and a lot of people, I think that is a huge reason of why people like still, well, I'm in control of my own finances and I'm in control of my own finances and we pay joint bills together and then you spend your money and I spend my money. Not to say that that's not a good solution for some people, but I think that, right, shows like an inherent level of like maybe a little bit of distrust or like not ready to trust at the level that a marriage might require.
Do you think are there resources and are there an emphasis in the military community specifically on like what is marriage, you know, and what does this commitment mean? Because in my opinion, marriage, yes, stabilizes someone, but it comes with its own bag, right? And when you have such a high stress profession, you have to be really intentional about protecting that family unit. And is there built in, because for me, it's very logical that the military would have these types of very intense, sometimes even more intense issues outside of community, because you're in this isolated community yourself. And when everything looks very normal, because that's just how that community runs, you forget that you're in this like little echo chamber. Like that's just the way marriage looks like in the military.
The way, any community is really.
Right. So has there been an enlightenment of like, this is not really healthy for our men and women in arms, and what do we expect them to do after they come home from deployment or whatever to just come back to this like peachy situation where there's no actual support? See, I'm a big supporter of our men and women in uniform. I've watched pretty much every military movie that's been it's like I'm a huge war movie junkie, and I've always gotten really upset with how much athletes get paid versus people that are risking their lives for our safety on the lines, right? It's a whole nother can of worms that I won't get into, but like why, if this is something that we've recognized, something like you in the field as an expert have recognized as a problem, why are we not putting money into helping these men and women that have literally put their lives on the line?
I mean, that's a big question.
Yeah.
It's a very big question.
Yeah. Like it boggles my mind and it's very frustrating for me.
Well, to answer, I think the first part of your question, like, is the Army doing anything, or is the military doing anything to address, and of course I can only speak on the Army perspective,
Sure.
doing anything to address this issue? And I think yes and no, it's a big company, right? It's a very big organization.
Sure.
And so it's hard for them to, I think, like sexual harassment, the SHARP program while I was in, it grew a lot, became really big. And there were a lot of very positive changes that came with it that I felt. And there were also some negative things. As far as domestic violence goes, I think it's very much up to the lower level. So at the company level, like your leadership, like as a non-commissioned officer, once you have earned that title, you're entrusted with the safety of your soldiers, like the well-being of your soldiers. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
At least I take it as a very huge responsibility, and it's an honor, right?
Yes.
You have a lot, you're a leader. You have a lot of responsibility to help people think about the issues that they're going through and to support them while they try to combat these things. And so, for my own soldiers, I would try to give them to be available. Like if you want to give me your perspective of like how your life's going or how your marriage is going, like we can talk about it. We can compare notes on like toxic relationships or relationships that have been positive for us, and what were the things that made them either toxic or positive. Just like more of an open dialogue on it, and them being comfortable to come to you with questions about it. And then I would say a level up from your first leader, right, your non-commissioned officer, is like at the company level. So a lot of companies adopted this when we go to a training, like let's say we're in Yakima for 3 months, and you're leaving your family for 3 months. You're able to talk to them whenever you have time. If you have cell phone service, like there are so many factors. Right? And that's just basically like it's a training, but it's a mini deployment. This is what it would look like
To be disconnected.
Yes, and it's a short 3-month period. So I think like there are trainings that are like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. Like these are preparations, I think, for people to take advantage of. This is what it might look like. It's going to be
ease you in.
Yes, which I think is very well done. I think that it should be that way more. It's just kind of like a trial run of what this would look like, a short period of time, and then you can come back. I wasn't in a marriage where I had kids at that point, so I can imagine that would be very intimidating to try to navigate. And I would definitely prefer to have like a 2-week period where we can be like, okay, what's this going to look like childcare when I can't do it, or like how do we do this?
Right, because there's a lot you're missing in a 3-month span.
Oh yeah,
in a child's life.
Yeah, kid like play dates. Yeah, school.
There's just a lot.
After school activities. Like how is only one parent supposed to navigate all of that by themselves? Oof. And so when we would come back from longer trainings like that, we did have it's a dry period, right, where you're not allowed to drink for like 2 days.
Oh.
And that was because I think they were finding at a higher level that like when people return from, and it wasn't just like married soldiers, any soldier, you weren't allowed to drink for at least 2 weeks after, because you hadn't been allowed to drink for 3 months. You know what I mean? And they were finding that people were then getting back and being like, oh, I'm free. And then they're binge drinking. And then what comes out of that is like physical confrontation, whether it's with another soldier or with your spouse. And so I think that was also a good measure that they took. Now, I don't know if that's Army-wide or if that was just a thing that happened a lot in the units that I was in. But I noticed that it was a fairly standard practice, definitely standard for the leaders that I respected and looked up to. As I was like, oh, they're understanding this from a wider perspective. And then the Army does have, so it's called the FRG, the Family Resource Group. I think that's what it is. I wasn't very involved because it is very much more like for spouses, but it's supposed to be a built-in support for spouses. Like when everybody goes on a deployment, spouses have to come together and say like those things that we're talking about, play dates. Can you pick my kid up from school if I have to work?
So building a community
Yeah.
for the spouses that are
Yes.
behind. But
it wasn't always successful.
Yeah.
From unit to unit, it
Yeah.
very, very much depended. Some were like great, and others were like, nobody wants to be a part of this. Why are we even?
So it's like a forced thing
Totally.
instead of it being more organic. When
That's a hard. Yeah, it's hard to navigate.
Well, it's like when it's forced, because you have this one thing that you only have in common about, and then you have a bunch of people who sometimes. Okay, I'm being very stereotypical and making sweeping statements. From what I've noticed is sometimes the spouses are very young, and it's hard. They don't even know themselves. How do they know how to communicate what their needs to another woman or to another person? So can be very awkward and very unnatural.
Yeah. So they tried, at least from what I noticed, is that the FRG leader was always like the first sergeant's wife. And so that she could kind of start that dialogue, right? And typically these people, they've been married for like 15 years. So they do have a lot of relationship advice, and they've been through multiple deployments already. So they can lead you through that. Yeah. But every community is different, right? Sometimes people want to be supported, and sometimes they want to isolate themselves. And I think it really just, it definitely just depended on, right, like who the leader was, what their take on, like what their responsibility was in creating this group, how they went about it. It's just, it's very nuanced.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. There should be studies on it.
Yeah. There should be so many studies on everything.
Yeah. Because you have like a group of people that is just kind of like.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Like is in their own little bubble that you could really, from a social standpoint, like you can really dive into that and just understand like different layers and dynamics of like why people are attracted to that community in the first place, you know?
No, trust me.
It's
Studying
fascinating.
psychology and like looking back on everything, I'm like, this is just a missed opportunity for some like research psychologists to come in.
Yeah.
Like, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
But I think the worst thing that the military does is so I'll explain this. Soldiers get basic housing allowance. So, basic allowance for housing, I think, BAH. And they get a higher amount of money and can live off post if they are married or if they have dependents. Yes. So if you are living, and this is my personal experience, right, coming into the Army, my first duty station, I walked into this government building and it looked like a freaking insane asylum. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, concrete blocks is what it's comprised of. Like, I walk in my room and it's like the bunk bed.
Yes.
Like,
little
closet.
sink.
Yeah. Good to go. Like, no, not even a sink. You have to shared bathroom. So you'd have to walk down the hallway and it was gross.
So it's like a dorm room kind of style, but kind of worse.
Oh, this was the worst unit that I was in. It was the first floor was the company. So your work operations, and then second, third, and fourth floors were rooms for soldiers. So now, like, imagine you work, Monday through Friday, but then if you're an MP, for instance, you work Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday on shift work. If they need something, what are they going to come do during the day, even though you're off? They're going to come knock on your door and they're going to say, hey, we need you to fill out this paperwork, or we need you to help in the arms room, or we need you to do something. And there was no separation from work. I mean, it drove me insane. And I was like, it is an insane asylum. So when you think about that and then how appealing, like if you meet somebody that you're interested in, how appealing it would be to get out of the insane asylum and go live in like a nice house. You might be willing to rush that relationship along before it's ready, which is exactly what I did. I met somebody and I'm like, yeah, this seems like this would be a really good relationship. And I think I was 20. So I had this very like idealistic and naive view of what marriage meant. I think, and I still like looking back on that time, and this being pretty harsh on myself, but I think that I cared more about having a wedding and getting married than I did actually about having a marriage. And I think that that's just like a very young, like it's a young woman's point of view, right? Like
Sure.
these are the things that you're brought up to like look toward. Like
well, when you have the
I go to school, I go to
Sure.
college, I get married. Like,
yes,
like
yeah.
my life is complete now.
Right,
And
right.
It's totally not. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you have the Kardashians throwing millions of dollars at the most lavish wedding, you know, you
Yeah.
kind of idolize that subconsciously, regardless of if you like them or not.
Yep.
But there's this level of like, that is a pivotal achievement.
Yes.
And I'm going to have my white picket fence and everything's going to be perfect afterwards. And then reality hits and it's not, right?
Like this isn't actually as easy as.
Yeah, this is not fun.
It's not. I'm not having a good time. Yeah. Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, to answer your question, I think that that's why. I think that that's a huge reason of why domestic violence is. There are so many factors, of course, but why it is so prevalent is because people are getting married so young, and it's because of that financial. This thing pushing you toward like why you're making it easier for me to make this decision. You're saying you're going to give me more money if I get married. Of course I'm going to get married.
Yeah.
And then there's this saying, right, in in the army, you're not a real soldier until you've been divorced at least once.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and that's a very common like.
That's so sad.
It isn't it? It's so depressing. It's definitely been, and again, speaking from personal experience, I can say that within the military, like within that community, marriage does not mean it's not very serious. It doesn't mean anything. You can get married, you can get divorced. It's very easy to do both. You can do it online. You can mail your documents. It's not a big deal, especially in Washington. It's very easy to get divorced.
Yeah,
It's very easy to get married. It's very easy to get divorced. And it's just not seen as like this. How it more traditionally is seen, like it's a responsibility, you know, it's a very
it's
big,
work.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to work at
and
it. Yeah.
These are things that I did not understand until I would say more recently. Like I just told you, I just changed my last name, which I think on some level for me was like how do I think that this relationship will last, and not in a conscious way, because of course I was like. I'm all in, you know what I mean? But very subconsciously was like, man, it's just too hard. Like I have to do all this stuff. And then when I had like an honest conversation with myself about it, I was like, dude, what are you scared of? Like, this is just fear. This is not.
Well, you've been programmed in some ways.
100%.
To think that way of like, man, it's going to be a pain in the ass. I have to change my name back if this doesn't work out.
Yep.
And if you have that mentality walking into a marriage, then what the freak is the point?
Yep. Then you're married? You're not even all in on it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. And it's like it's built in to that culture of you can walk away from this. It's not really a commitment.
Yep.
It's a commitment with a loophole.
Yeah. I mean, it's just you're in a relationship the same as you were in a relationship before. You just signed a piece of paper.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. That makes me really sad.
I know.
It makes me really sad because, you know, marriage is it's a big deal.
Yep.
And so if that's not built into the prep of marriage, then it's so easy to walk away from it. It's really easy to walk away because it just doesn't feel good anymore.
Yep. Well, I think our society too is very instant gratification.
Oh, yeah.
It's just everything. Like
I don't feel good.
Instacart. I want to get I want groceries and I don't want to go to the grocery store. So I'm going to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everything is very easy and accessible to us. And if it's not, then we just move on to the next thing that is.
Right.
And marriage is definitely, it's the long game, right? Like you're not always going to be happy. You have to put in work. Honestly, it makes you feel uncomfortable about yourself. Like you're like, oh, I'm not perfect. Why didn't anyone tell me?
Yes. It's a form of purification that you did not think would get that deep.
Yep. Like
whoa.
teasing all the things out of me.
Yes. So it's like with this breakdown of an understanding of a very, well, just to back up, I think your normal typical person thinks the military and the army and these very militant type of corporations is very conservative. And you're talking about something that's not very conservative.
No.
Because your typical stereotype of a conservative person is in a 40-year plus marriage, 8 kids, picket fence kind of situation. And you're kind of dispelling that a little bit of like, this is the space and the community that's built is not built on those types of values, conservative, traditional values. So, people.
Yeah.
If you have those types of, stereotypes,
Yes.
that's not the issue here, or that's not true here. And if your marriage and your relationship is built on something that's very fleeting and very easy to get out of, you don't put a lot of effort into it.
Why would you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if then you have the excuse of like, oh, well, I'm going to deploy for 9 months. You know what I mean? Like, why would you even bother if you don't have the foundation that you need, why would you bother putting in the effort that it's really going to take to sustain the relationship? And I mean, like another huge thing, and this is another stereotype, but it comes from something so real, is like they call it Jody. When you're deployed, Jody is the guy who steals your wife out from under you. She's lonely and she's at home and she leaves you for Jody.
Wow.
And so it's like you said, it's not, the trust and building the foundation, these aren't things that are taught or I think very much valued in the military. And like to hit on your point of, the more conservative perspective, I would say, there are definitely things like the whole idea of like being a patriot comes with like, I have the right to bear arms, and people see that as like, oh, then they're conservative. That's just a very small part of who a person is.
Right.
And it's a very broad like generalization. And I think it's veterans and people in the military are some of the most open-minded people I've ever met in my entire life.
Yeah, because they're exposed to a gazillion different things.
And like something people would say about conservatives is like, oh, well, you're a racist then. And in the Army, we have the saying, we're all green. And we don't see color. You know what I mean? There is no such thing. You can't afford to see that when you have to rely on somebody to potentially save your life, to have your back.
Sure.
And so there are many things right there that do not match up with, I think, people's idea of what it means to be a service member. I think we're definitely the most open-minded, not very conservative. We would have like what are conventionally uncomfortable conversations. Like, they say don't talk about politics and don't talk about religion at the dinner table or whatever. We would have conversations like that all the time, like very serious, in-depth conversations, like driving our truck, 3 of us together for 5 hours, and we're having these profound conversations and saying our different opinions and actually listening to each other because we're stuck together. We're a team.
Right.
That's the best thing that I've ever taken away from being in the military, is that no matter your upbringing or your opinion on anything, you can always find common ground with somebody. And I think that that's something a lot of people have forgotten.
Well, just having a conversation, just having a face-to-face conversation.
What's that?
Yeah. Just like, I don't have to hide behind a screen, and I don't have to just send words without tone.
Yeah. Well, you can perfectly formulate a text over 20 minutes, but if you're face to face in a conversation, you have to actually say, oh, God forbid, what you think and what you feel, and then you open yourself up to somebody not agreeing with that. And I think that that's a lot. It's very intimidating for some people. But in like a text or an email or whatever, you can formulate that for as long as you want before you send it, and then the response that you get is also formulated. It's very interesting.
Yeah. So it's these societal issues that contributes to things like domestic violence and a gazillion eating disorders and drug abuse and substance abuse and all of this stuff is such a breakdown of communication.
It really is.
It's a breakdown of knowing how to connect with someone, truly connect with someone that might not come from the same background as you, might not come from the same upbringing, financial, all of that stuff. It is a breakdown of, I'm going to just automatically form these opinions about you and just not listen anymore.
I actually just scolded a friend on this topic. So, because we come to each other for relationship advice all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
Something my husband and I have very much established is, well, because we've both been in very toxic relationships, we call it, don't break the china. Like you cannot put it back together. So that's our saying. You can't, once you say something, you can't unsay it. It's potentially like extremely damaging to your relationship or to your partner. So I scolded her basically on, they were having a fight via text. And I was like,
why?
Thank you. I was like, girl, don't ever fight over text. Like
it never ends well.
It never does.
It
and
never
like
ends well.
think about where your man is right now. And I'm like, he's at work and he's got to deal with work stressors and different things. And I'm like, you're at home just hanging out and you have time to think about all of these things and you're bombarding him with all of your feelings that you are able to write out. And this poor guy he's at work. Like, why can't you, if you're mad now, you can think about it and you can save it for 3 hours from now when he gets home.
Or write it down.
Yes.
And then read it to him when he gets home. Or
then like you guys can have a conversation about it face to face. And she was like, yeah, well, and I'm like, no, because it's the instant gratification. You're just saying like, I'm mad now. I need to express that now. Don't. I'm like, do not. You're going to ruin your relationship texting, fighting over text. It's just not worth it.
Yes. There's something about a pause or reaching out to another girlfriend or reaching out to someone else that you trust.
Yeah.
And being like, am I being wildly unreasonable in this situation? But then there's layers to that. Reaching out to people when you're in those moments, but also being allowed to receive what that other person's going to say. So that's so beautifully, that's such a great example because it comes down to communication and community. Who is your community? Who is that person for you to be very, very vulnerable with?
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't have to be your spouse.
I find everyone needs a sounding board.
Yeah.
Like, am I being crazy?
Yes.
And you need a good one. You need friends who are going to be like, you are being crazy.
Yes. Yes. I definitely have that. Like, I've been very fortunate to have that girlfriend who's in Houston. Shout out to my best friend Nina. Nina. She has, she's just seen me in my worst. Like, we're best friends. And I think sometimes people have this ideology that your spouse needs to be your best friend. They can. That's great if you do. But man, having that girlfriend that's just like, sometimes we just are like, yas girling each other or like, no, you're being psycho right now.
Help me help you.
Which is so, and they have a way of saying things that because you're not in this direct conflict with that person, they're able to like reiterate or like, are you sure you want to say that way? Because it did not come off good to me.
Well, your relationship, like with your best friend, with another, with another woman or another man, whatever, is just as complicated as a marriage, right? Because there are all these things that you have to take into account in a friendship. But the one thing that you're not bringing into that is like, we also have a sexual relationship, which is, I think, like influences things a lot, right? You also don't live with your best friend 24/7 and you live with your spouse 24/7, So like this perfect example, I was like about to start my period, PMSing, and I was like telling my best friend, blah, blah, this and that, and he's doing this, and she's like, do you think you might be about to start your period? And I was like, I am. But if my husband had sent that to me, I would have flown off the handle. This isn't about me PMSing and I know how to control my, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, just the ability for her to like be honest and me to not take it as personally as I would if my spouse had said it.
Yes.
That relationship is so important.
Yeah. So in your opinion, how can people who could possibly slip into a domestic violence, domestic kind of argumentative situation, in your opinion, what can people do? What can partners do? What are the signs that we as a community can look out for each other and say, this can lead to something much more serious if we don't pay attention to? What are your top 3, like, boom, boom, boom? These are these red flags that you really need to pay attention to when you get married, when you become, committed to someone, so that you don't slip, you don't potentially slip into a situation that no one wants to get into.
Yep.
You don't wake up going,
I would love to be in a horribly toxic relationship today.
Yeah, this sounds great to me. I want to sign up for that.
I make it the next 25 years.
Yeah, I don't think anyone consciously chooses that.
No.
You just end up there and you go like, why didn't anyone say anything?
Yeah.
Why didn't I have the tools? Yeah.
I think, I mean, and this is definitely my personal opinion and my learning from my own relationship, is that a huge part of it is your relationship with yourself. You know, obviously I studied psychology. I'm a huge believer in therapy and all of the good things that it can do for all of us.
Right.
And as important as like couples counseling might be, if you are not ready to work on yourself individually as a person, then maybe you're not ready to be in a serious relationship or a serious marriage. I think that's a lot of the times where it starts, right? Is like I have lost confidence in myself, or I don't have a good view of myself in the world, or like what I have to offer, or, you know, just feeling insecure. These are all things that everybody goes through.
Sure.
And there are ways to build up your self-confidence, but that's what I saw in a lot of relationships where things weren't going well, is like one partner is being insecure, and that would result in either the other person taking over everything, because it's like, oh, well, she has completely she's depressed, she's given up on helping me manage bills, helping me do this, helping me do that, and then the other partner completely takes over everything, which
builds up resentment,
and then eventually is going to lead to that, well, I'm in charge of all of this stuff. And then like if the recipe goes the right way, you know what I mean, it could potentially lead to that. I think that's a huge warning sign. Like if you're depressed and you're in a marriage, lean on your partner. Like that is one of the biggest ways to build the trust, but also to not give anyone like power dynamic over the other. You know, like if I am vulnerable to my husband, I know that he will take care of me. But in turn, he knows that he can be vulnerable with me and I will take care of him. And it's this balancing act of like love and support. But if one person has too much or always has it and is never willing to give it, I think that's a huge red flag. Self-help, therapy.
That takes a lot of self-awareness, though.
It really does.
It takes like a lot of like internal dialogue with yourself and being like, am I being a
lot
prick?
Of people are scared to have internal dialogue. Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
They're like, I'm perfect. The world is rosy. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Or it's someone else's problem.
Yeah. Or it's because of somebody else, the blame game kind of thing.
And it's a fine balance between having an internal dialogue and being self-deprecating.
Totally. Yes.
Right? Like it's like you can take it to the extreme. So checking in with people and saying like, we always talk about moderation on these podcasts. I feel like a broken record sometimes.
It's important.
But when it comes to like healthcare, mental health, all of that stuff, it's like, how do you find this even keeled kind of approach? It's never going to be perfect because it's not this cookie cutter situation every single time. But having markers in your life, people, checkpoints in your life maybe would be good to have. And just being like, am I being crazy? Am I being balanced in this? Am I self-reflecting to a point where it is uncomfortable? But that uncomfortableness, again, then ties back into our society not wanting us to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
But in order to reach a pivotal point of understanding oneself, there needs to be discomfort.
Yeah, there really does. Well, there is no growth without discomfort.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah, you become very stunted, right?
Yeah.
And then that stuntedness becomes a ripple effect into so many different factors.
Yeah.
So many different factors.
Yep.
So
no, I would say, yeah, I believe in therapy. I believe in self-work. I think once you stop doing those things for yourself, it becomes harder for other people, especially in a relationship where there is always a power dynamic. It becomes harder for your partner to respect you if you don't respect yourself, you know? So I'd say that would be a huge thing that I noticed that would lead to just like the power dynamic. If you're not taking care of yourself and somebody else feels like they're going to have to, you're giving them your power, you know? Gosh, I was going to say second thing is the isolation. I mean, and I think we already kind of covered it. Like that's a huge issue, not only in the military community, but in society. Like people, I just want to scroll on my phone. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to have a conversation with people. It's too hard. It's too texting. It's too this, whatever your excuse is. But if you don't, like we're talking about our sounding board, I instantly think of my best friend, and she would tell me if I was being crazy, or she'll tell me like, girl, I got your back. What I mean? She's always going to be honest with me. Now, those friends are few and far between.
Sure.
But you're never going to find that friend if you don't put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part. It's an issue in our community in general, I think right now, is like nobody wants to go out and meet anybody and make friends anymore.
Yes. Yeah. And COVID did not help. Yeah. I think it just further fueled this isolation bubble.
Why do I need to go outside?
Yes.
People will bring me everything I need to my house.
And I can talk to people through a screen.
Yeah.
Which is so unnatural.
Well, there's a reason why it makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah, it makes, and having hard conversations with people.
Over Zoom, I can't imagine.
Oh, gosh. I was so sick of that.
Yeah.
For 2 years that we had to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a few therapy appointments that were difficult during COVID. I think COVID was a lot of good things came out of mental health for COVID because it was such a huge issue. But I specifically remember an appointment that I had where we were having a very serious conversation, and it just still felt so disconnected because I wasn't in the same room as her. And, she was in a very clinical setting. I could tell on her end. And then I'm over here sitting on my couch, where I'm comfortable and I'm bawling my eyes out, and she has no reaction, it's just very disconnected.
Yeah, there's something sitting in the same room with someone. There's somewhat of a spiritual aspect to it that you're
even the
connecting.
Ability. I know that right now you could, if I started crying, that you could reach out and
give you
touch
a tissue,
me,
hug you,
some type of support.
Yes.
Whereas through a screen, all you can say is, "I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
It's just doesn't. It's not the same.
Yeah, it definitely. Yeah, it creates so many barriers. Technology can be such a good resource, but it comes with consequences.
Absolutely.
When it's not being used correctly. Yeah, we covered a lot of heavy stuff, Tori.
We did. Yeah. We definitely did. I have so much more to say. I could talk about it.
I know.
I could talk about the topic forever.
Yes.
Because there's like we said, there could be studies on studies on studies about all of the different factors that lead to this being a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're having to kind of scratch the surface at this point due to just our limited time. But it is something that needs to be on people's radar, and it needs to be kind of a reality check maybe for some of our folks that might be listening of even if you're not in a domestic violence situation, maybe if you're just in a relationship that's struggling, what have we touched on that could help you just pause and be like, that might be something I need to check in with someone about or self-reflect about. And it's okay to do that because we're human and we need other perspectives and we don't know everything, even though Google can give us the answer to it. It might not be the right perspective or might not be the right thing for us to hear. And how do we form our own approaches and our own coping mechanisms and our own approaches to just life issues that is normal things that we have to go through?
Yeah. I think people need to just stop limiting themselves, go out, experience more things. Either you like it or you don't. You're uncomfortable or you're not. You learn something from every interaction that you have with somebody. And learning something can never be negative, right?
Yes.
The more education that we have on topics, whether or not you agree,
sure,
you can always learn something or have a takeaway that fits you personally.
Yeah, and just because the other person has a slew of opinions that don't match up with you, but they have one thing that does not make it bad that you agree with them. I think that's another thing. Is
totally.
There's this there's getting into a political division, with the election looming over our heads.
God, I can't wait for it to be over.
I know. But just because someone that's a Republican or a Democrat say something that you agree with, you don't have to completely not agree with it. Like they can say something that you can agree with and you can acknowledge that. It's okay to acknowledge. It's okay to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
That that's a good thing that they said that aligned with your values you agreed with.
We're not, it's impossible. And people have this feeling like I have to agree with everything
that my party says. No,
like,
you don't.
You really don't.
No.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you agree with the majority of things that they say, or you trust that there is going to be a responsible way of like handling this issue. Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting to me. Like, we're all very different people, very different life experiences, very different perspectives, yet we're like, we all have to believe the same thing.
Yes.
What?
Yeah. Actually, that's kind of crazy if you do.
Yeah.
It's kind of culty if you do.
It's definitely very culty.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be a part of that.
No, I don't want to be. I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. Well, Tori, thank you so much for this conversation. And I'm so grateful that this is your thing, that you're part of this community that wants to talk about this. And, you know, your experience and background in combat and in the Army and military and all, you know, all of that stuff is like so unique. And it's it needs to be continuously talked about. So I'm so glad that we kind of approach this topic in a variety of different ways.
Totally.
And in some ways, the topic, even though it's very heavy, there are tools. There are folks like you that people can turn to that could be like, am I headed in the right direction, or do I need to pause and I need to reach out to an expert like you? So thank you so much for
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I feel like we barely scratched the surface, and of course I could talk about it for
we'll
literal
definitely
days. But I do hope that somebody got, you know, something out of what we talked about today. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And just, you know, just domestic violence as a whole contributes to so many other topics, and it's multi-layered, and it's something that we're not going to be able to fix in a day. But I think continuously having communication and talking about it and exposing it and saying it is not so simple. It's not simple to just walk away from something like this.
100%.
And it's not simple to just get over, and it's not simple to fall into. It takes
time.
It takes time. And sometimes you need people in your life to kind of point it out. These are red flags we need to look at.
100%.
So thank you for putting a language to it, for giving it space to be highlighted. It's a hard topic to talk about. And because it relates to so many different things, it's never going to be a linear conversation. It's all over the map.
Yeah.
It's all over the map. And that's a good thing. Yeah.
So, no, I completely agree.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. We're going to have you back, and we're going to continue to dive deeper into this topic.
I'd love to.
Yeah. So anyways, thanks for listening to this episode today. And I hope you walk away just thinking more about it and knowing that you're not alone. And if you need to reach out to someone like Tori, we will happily put you in touch with her. And yeah, how do we build back community? How do we do that? Maybe that starts with reevaluating what we can contribute to that community. So thanks for listening, and till next time. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tori.
Thank you.
For more information about 3W, please visit our website at 3wmedical.org. That's the number 3, the letter W, medical.org. From there, you can learn more information about the services we provide, book an appointment, or make a donation if you'd like to support our mission. You can also call our office at 206-588-0311. That's 206-588-0311. If you like this episode, please share it with others and consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, stay healthy and be well.